Jesus said that he did not know the day that he would return. How could this be if he's omniscient?
How can Jesus be God if he doesn't know the time of his return? Those who deny the deity of Christ love to cite Mark 13:32 as proof that Jesus cannot be God. Speaking of the second coming, Jesus says, "But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." If Jesus is God, then he's omniscient. But this text says the Son is not omniscient. Therefore, Jesus cannot be God. I've heard this from Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, and many others. I believe that this is a legitimate challenge to our view that demands an explanation. But I think it can be explained by considering the incarnation. When the second person of the Trinity took on human flesh, he also took on certain limitations. This was the only way to fulfill his role as a human being. By limitations, I mean that there was a voluntary restricting or veiling of his divine attributes.
Were they restricted or were they veiled? These are not the same thing. If Jesus' divine attributes were restricted, then he made himself less divine and could not be fully God, which is not how the Trinity describes him. If he merely veiled his divine attributes, then his human appearance was at least partly an appearance. He wasn't really as human as he looked.
He did not give up his divine attributes. If he did, well, he'd cease to be God. Rather, he willingly chose not to use them. This is an important distinction.
Then it wouldn't be accurate to say that he restricted his divine attributes. He merely veiled them. However, if he didn't give up his divine foreknowledge, if he merely chose not to use it, then it wasn't accurate for Jesus to say that he didn't know the date of his return. He did, in fact, have that knowledge.
It isn't mere speculation either. Paul describes this mystery in his letter to the Philippians. He says, "Though he, Jesus, was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross."
What did Paul mean when he said that Jesus didn't count equality with God a thing to be grasped? Was it not a thing to be grasped because it isn't true? Or was it not a thing to be grasped because he wanted to deceive us into not grasping it? Or is it not to be grasped because it is a contradiction that simply can't make any sense to mere humans? Which is an argument some apologists actually use. If Jesus really limited his divine attributes, he would be less than a god. This is theologically unacceptable to many Christians, so it's considered heresy. If Jesus is completely a god but merely made it appear that he had human limitations, then his death on the cross was not a genuinely human death and thus could not truly atone for human sins. This is theologically unacceptable to many Christians and is considered a heresy called docetism. The only acceptable perspective to Trinitarians is that Jesus is 100% a human while simultaneously being 100% a non-human God. This is an obvious contradiction, but who are we to expect a God to abide by our pathetic human standards of logic and coherence? Thanks again for helping me out on Patreon.